I had a disaster happen earlier today. It's not good, but I spilled coffee all over the place. So everything right here in the Panther-Lair.com studios smells like coffee. Normally, the Panther-Lair.com studios might smell like coffee because I have a cup of coffee here, but today they smell like coffee because I spilled it all over the place. And my tabletop, the thing that my laptop and everything sit on, which is like a fabric thing, I tried to use a cleaner on it, and now that stinks even worse because it's a combination of coffee and cleaner. My chair stinks and the floor stinks. It's not good here at the Panther-Lair.com studios, where we film all the youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com videos. It all smells. But I'm going to try and muscle through it. I'm going to work through it. I'm going to sacrifice for you, the loyal viewers and listeners of the Panther-Lair show, and the Panther-Lair podcast, and all the other things here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I'm going to power through it and talk to you about a little Pitt basketball. I got 5 topics on my mind today, 5 things ranging from the guard who got away to some of the players that they need and what they're going to be looking to fill in here, and what some of the returning guys, what they could potentially do for this team next season. So you don't have to smell the coffee in the cleaner. I do. I'll work through it. You just listen to the words here on the Morning Pitt on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, I like to think our Morning Pitt here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com goes great with coffee, but not exactly this way. I'd like to think that you're drinking coffee while listening to it, or watching it, or whatever it may be, not smelling coffee the whole time, and the mix of coffee and cleaner the whole time like we are here in the Panther-Lair.com studios. Diving in for the Wednesday edition of the Morning Pitt on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. As everybody on YouTube asks you to do, like and subscribe. Like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Everybody on YouTube says that, and that's why I started saying it as well, to try to get you to get on board with our video content here, our Pitt video content, these Morning Pitt videos we have every day of the week, Monday through Friday, our live show that we're going to do tonight. And I don't want you to forget that it's happening tonight, so I'm telling you right now, it's happening tonight at 8 p.m. right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Me and Jim Hammett will get together for an hour to talk a little Pitt sports with you. And then we have post-game shows, we have video highlights from practice, interviews, press conferences. All that stuff is right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So I, like every other YouTuber in the universe, will ask you once again to like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. A lot of conversation on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com, Panther-Lair.com, and obviously a lot of conversation about spring football. That's going on, and there's a lot to talk about on that front. We'll have a lot of content for you today and throughout the week, of course, discussing what's going on in spring football, heading into the spring game on Saturday at Acrisure Stadium. There's also a lot of conversation on the basketball side of things as well. Our message boards at Panther-Lair.com, where you can hang out with hundreds and thousands of other Pitt fans. We are full of conversation about Pitt football, Pitt basketball, and Pitt recruiting. It's all happening. And a lot of times that provides some of the inspiration for what we are, talk about here on these Morning Pitt videos on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And so, I figure we could talk about some of the topics that have been popular here. Some of the things that Pitt fans were discussing and have been discussing. And a few things that sort of just came to mind for me. And one is a guard who got away. And I think it's pretty low on the what if scenarios. But there is something to be said for the question of what if, or what would have happened for Pitt this past season if Dior Johnson didn't get kicked out of school. If Dior Johnson never had the situation and never was involved in the situation he was involved in last fall that ultimately led to his suspension and then dismissal from Pitt. And I only bring this up because I just saw that he was a junior college All-American at Calderon College or someplace. I don't know where he played or what he did there. I know that he helped them get to the region championship game where they ultimately lost like 100-99, but he was an all-conference player. He was an All-American, a first-team All-American, the only guy from his school to make any of the All-American teams, the junior college All-American teams, first, second, third, or honorable mention, which says not a little bit, says a lot about what he did for that team and how he helped them to get to the level they were at and the success they enjoyed this year. And I mean, you would see it pop up every now and then, some of his highlights or his stat lines. I mean, he played great at the junior college level this year. And he's certainly going to have some kind of opportunity to play college basketball next season. It's going to be very interesting to see where he ends up. One of the debates on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com has been about sort of where Dior might go and what kind of school he might end up with. And there's always the cynical response of, Kentucky will take him or Louisville will take him. And you might be right. That might happen. But then there's also sort of more reasonable, rational responses that I don't think he's going to go any kind of high major school, that there might just be enough red flags with his history and then the situation that unfolded with him over the last year that it might be a tough sell for any school to take him, any high major school, and maybe any mid-major school. He might be looking at the low major level or down into the D2 level, which would obviously be a giant fall for someone of his talent. And there's never been any question about his talent level, and there is no question about his talent level. He just might have reached the point where there are too many red flags for it to happen, for it to work out for him. And that's a shame, but without getting too far down the road, going too far down the rabbit hole of his situation, there is some accountability you need to take for your own situation sometimes. Nevertheless, the question of what Dior could have done at Pitt this past season is an interesting one. It's a hypothetical that ultimately doesn't serve any purpose, but it's interesting to consider because how would he have fit in with Bub Carrington, Jalen Lowe, and Ishmael Leggett? Would he have been some missing piece that would have put them over the top? I think there are some readers at Panther-Lair.com that would suggest as much. But at the same time, they ended up with a pretty strong rotation and found some real chemistry with those three guards rotating for each other and playing with each other. And for as much as I said throughout the year, both here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com and on Panther-Lair.com, on Pittsburgh.rivals.com, our website, I said a lot, you're not going to be able to keep playing on these guys all these minutes. You're not going to be able to keep playing them together. They're going to burn out. You can't keep playing them 30 minutes a game. They kept playing 30 minutes a game, and they kept playing together, and they kept playing a lot, and they were fine. They were fine all the way through the season. So that didn't exactly work out, or my prediction of it didn't exactly work out. It worked out for Pitt, though, obviously. I just don't know. They found such a good chemistry. I'm not sure how Dior would have fit in with that chemistry. And maybe they would have made it work with four guards, and it would have been even smoother. And maybe particularly in the early going, maybe Dior could have made a difference, but he had just as much college game experience as Jalen Lowe and Bub Carrington, so maybe not. And we'll watch and see where his career goes. We'll see where he ends up, if he ends up at a low major or D2, or if he finds a home in the mid-major or high major level. And we'll see what his career becomes. Like I said, there's no question about his talent. It'll remain a what if and a hypothetical, and not one that there's a lot gained from, but one we'll probably discuss on Panther-Lair.com and here on YouTube.com at various points over the next few years as we sort of track his career. Now, on the topic of guards, though, this is sort of the second thing I've been thinking about. As it stands right now, and we'll come back to this point, Pitt has 3 open scholarship spots. And I talked a little bit about this on Monday when we talked about the Jalen Lowe effect. I think getting another guard, particularly, especially after Bub Carrington left, it's a priority for Pitt now. It's a priority for Jeff Capel to find a guard out of the transfer portal. And I really think you're looking for a 2-guard who can play next to Jalen Lowe. I get the impression that the coaching staff is comfortable with Ishmael Leggett coming off the bench and that they like the element of Ishmael Leggett coming off the bench. In which case, they're looking for a guard to start with Lowe, to have Lowe start at the point and a 2-guard who can start next to him, Ishmael Leggett and Brandon Cummings then coming off the bench, depending on how many minutes Cummings ends up earning. And we'll see what his freshman year brings. I think he's going to be pretty good. Is he going to be at a Carrington Lowe level? I don't necessarily think so, just because those guys played at a really high level, and it's unfair to him to set those expectations at that level. But I think they need and want a transfer guard who can come in and be a good shooter at the 2-guard, play with Lowe, and then ultimately work in a 3-guard lineup with Lowe and Leggett. Kind of like what you saw Bub Carrington do, although probably not the same kind of player. This team's going to need shooting. That's going to be a big part of it. I think you can get decent shooting, pretty decent shooting out of Lowe, Leggett, Maybe Cummings, depending on what his playing time and opportunity looks like. I think Zach Austin can occasionally knock down some shots. Obviously, the Twins can occasionally knock down some shots. But I think you need, Jim and I talked about it the other day, of you might need like a Greg Elliott type of sniper, although also somebody who can create for himself a little bit more than Elliott could. I don't think they're... I think when you look at the other weapons on this team this year, you don't necessarily have what you had, when you had Nelly Cummings and Jamarius Burton and Blake Hinson, that you could afford to have an extra guard who is just a shooting specialist. I think you need somebody closer to Nike Sabandi or Bub Carrington than Greg Elliott for that other spot. You should be able to find it. You should have the minutes to offer, which I don't think they had last year. I think last year they ran into trouble when they were trying to get a guard out of the portal. And that guard looked at it and said, Coach, you got Lowe and Carrington, you got Dior, you got Leggett, you just got... Where exactly am I fitting into this? Like how exactly, what's my role going to be? Where are my minutes going to come from? I think it's an easier sell this year in light of Bub Carrington going to the NBA. I think it's an easier sell to say, look, we have Lowe, we like Leggett off the bench. Cummings is we want Cummings to be our fourth guy. We need the guy to step in as the starting off-ball guard, who occasionally could be a ball handler if we need him to be, and play 35 minutes a game or 33 minutes a game or 30 minutes a game. There's a lot of opportunity there, more opportunity than there was, at least from a potential transfers perspective, more opportunity than there was a year ago at this time, or last summer. And so I think they should be able to find a quality guy. I think there's a, decent commitment on the NIL front that they should be able to, that shouldn't be a huge hindrance, although it's always going to be a factor to consider. I think they should be able to find a quality two guard, and that's really what they need. There's obviously a priority at the 4 and the 5. You need to get those positions filled as well. But with Bub Carrington's departure, the two guard became a priority equal to or above the 4 and the 5. Now, I think, and Jim and I talked about this last Wednesday in the live show that you can watch right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Every Wednesday night at 8 o'clock, we go live for a little Pitt conversation with you. You guys get into the chat screen over here, put your comments and your questions. We interact and go back and forth. Jim and I talk. We read your comments and questions and talk to you. It's a fun back and forth. It's like a call-in show. We have a good time with it. And we talked about it last week as far as like priorities from the transfer portal. And I think the 4 was the priority from the very start, with the 5 right behind it. The 2 now, I think, rivals the 4 on the priority list, but certainly slots in ahead of the 5. Because, like it or not, I think they can survive with Guillermo, Diaz-Graham, Papa Conti, and Amni Najai. And I apologize for butchering that name, but we'll get it right soon enough. You can survive with those guys if that's what you have to go with, and you could probably find like a lower level transfer to fill out the minutes. You can survive with that. You need to get a good 4. You need to get a good 2. Now, what we're going to talk about next, this next thing I'm sort of thinking about addresses some of that, and that's the roles of the Twins, of Guillermo Diaz-Graham and Jorge Diaz-Graham, and how they're going to fit in. The more I think about it, the less I like the idea of Guillermo playing the 4 full time. Like Jim and I talked about last week on the Panther-Lair show here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. He can shoot there. He can play offensively, but I don't know what the defensive matchup would look like. With going against certain 4s, certain types of 4s, could Guillermo defend Blake? To some extent, maybe. That length can go a long way. And if you have a 4 like Blake, who isn't necessarily a great driver, although when he does try to drive, he uses his strength, which is going to take advantage of Guillermo's biggest weakness, which is weakness. I think if you have a 4 who's athletic, who could stretch out to the 3 and could put the ball in the court and drive a little bit, that's going to be a real challenge for Guillermo. It's going to be a challenge for a lot of guys. I think you have a 4 who's maybe a little bit more stout, a little stronger, an Ian Shefflin type or something. That's going to be a challenge for Guillermo as well to try to defend. And so I'm almost inclined to say I would like to see Guillermo stay at the 5. Jorge, I think, is a little bit more of a toss-up. maybe the 4, maybe the 3. I mean, the coaching staff has been very consistent in saying that Jorge Diaz-Graham is a wing. Not another center. They're not, it's not like Guillermo and Jorge are both centers. He's a wing of some kind. He's a 3 or a 4. And, where he fits in there, my thought is initially he fits in as a rotation with Zach Austin, although that rotation takes a hit when they go to the 3-guard lineup, in which case he would need to work as a 4, play as a power forward and kind of rotate in there. Maybe that's a better spot for him than the 3 anyway. I feel like the Twins, more than anybody else on this team, their roles will be, if not defined by, they'll be decided by what happens in Pitt's efforts in the transfer portal, who they bring in, what kind of acquisitions they make, and what the roster looks like. That those guys can move around, that if you have a better option for a spot that you want to play them, they can move, to a different role. Now that kind of deprioritizes them a little bit, makes them less than, major contributors. But I think Guillermo probably could retain his role as the top backup center. Ideally you would go get a good transfer center, a solid transfer center, a guy who probably can play defense and rebound. I'm not sure you're going to get a great offensive center, and with Guillermo on the roster, you don't need a great offensive center. You need a guy who can play defense and rebound and offer a little bit of rim protection. Maybe a guy like Federico, or at least what Federico was supposed to be coming out of his first year, coming out of last season, 2 years ago, I should say. But you get a guy like that, and then Guillermo can operate as your backup 5 and play 22 minutes per game and knock down a couple threes and be a threat and drag a center out to the 3-point line and open things up, for guards to drive, for Ishmael Leggett to drive, for Jalen Lowe to drive. I think that's a good role for him. Jorge, maybe 4, maybe 3, but it depends on what they get at the 4. I think ideally you'd get a good enough power forward that you don't need to play Jorge at the 4. But depends on what they get. Those two, I think, will be determined. Their roles will be determined by what else Pitt lands from the transfer portal. The next thing I was thinking about, and we've talked about this before, and I don't really know what to make of it, but it's still remarkable to me. Jeff Capel is entering season 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. He's approaching season 7 at Pitt, which is a long time. I mean, first off the bat, he's been here a long time. To still have the same 3 assistants in place that he had when he came in. Now he's added to that staff. The NCAA has raised the limits on how many staff members you can have, so he's added to that group. But to still have those same 3 guys, Tim O'Toole and Milan Brown and Jason Capel, Jeff's brother, that's really remarkable to me. I mean, you usually see some kind of movement. And I understand Pitt was pretty bad for the first 4 out of those, the last 6 seasons. And so who would hire the assistant coach away from a team that only wins like 10 games? I get that. But even then, you expect some amount of movement from the coaching staff. There's been none, and it doesn't appear like, I guess we're officially in the postseason now, and officially in the offseason, I should say. And so maybe some of that movement starts happening, but I don't know. I'm kind of inclined to think these guys are all sticking around, which I don't know what to make of that. I don't know if it's good or bad. I don't know what to read into it. Maybe they just really like Pittsburgh. Maybe they don't have any other options. Maybe they're just committed to Jeff and committed to Pitt and committed to this job. But it's just weird. Don't you think? Isn't it one of the more interesting elements that these guys are all still here? Nobody's left. Nobody's been fired, which is a little bit remarkable given how the first 4 seasons went. They're all still around. I think that's interesting. And I'll build on that point and say, I think, don't quote me on this, but of course it's committed to video, so it's basically being quoted. I think the movement is done from the current roster as well. I think the whole coaching staff will be back next year, at least those 3 key guys, and I think the rest of the roster will be back. Those other, how many is it? 8 returning players, I think will all be back on the roster next season. I don't see any more of them going into the transfer portal. Obviously, Will Jefferson, Federico did. Bub Carrington went to the NBA. Blake Hinson and KJ Marshall are out of eligibility. I don't see anybody else going into the transfer portal from this roster. I think the guys who are here are here. I think everybody's more or less in place. I mean, we need to, I think you want to see things finalized with Ishmael Leggett. Pretty confident about Zach Austin coming back. Jalen Lowe already made his announcement. I think the Twins will be back. I think Papa Conti and Marlon Barnes will be back. I think you largely retain the remainder of the returning roster, the other 8 guys. And then you bring in the 2 freshmen, you go out and get 3 transfers, and you'll fill out your roster for the 2024-25 season. So maybe a little bit of stability there with the roster. Certainly we've got a lot of stability at Panther-Lair.com. Panther-Lair.com. Pittsburgh.rivals.com is the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet. Like everything that I was just saying here for the last 20 minutes, we're talking about on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com and probably having much better and more insightful conversations than what I just gave you. So if you're a Pitt fan, you want to hang out with other Pitt fans, you want to talk to other Pitt fans, come hang out at Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. Lots of dots in there. And then, of course, our YouTube channel here. I'll ask you, as every other YouTuber always asks you, like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. It's the best place to get your Pitt sports video content. Now, I'm going to get back to cleaning up all this spilled coffee. It really stinks in here. It doesn't smell good in the Panther-Lair.com studios, but you don't have to smell it. You just get to listen and watch. So we appreciate everybody tuning in today. Hope you had a great week so far. Hope you had a great Tuesday yesterday. Enjoy your Wednesday, and we'll catch up with you tonight for the live show at 8 o'clock, and then tomorrow for the Morning Pit right here on YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com.